The Vanishing Shopper. It was a cold December evening, and the mall was alive with excitement. Holiday lights twinkled, Christmas music played softly in the background, and the air smelled of cinnamon and freshly baked cookies from the food court. Families bustled around, carrying bags full of gifts, while children laughed and pointed at the oversized Christmas tree in the center of the mall. The holiday spirit was everywhere. Lucy, a young woman in her mid-20s, stepped into the mall, rubbing her hands together to warm them. She had just come from the cold outdoors, where the winter wind had nipped at her cheeks. Her long brown coat and knitted scarf were barely enough to keep her warm. As she looked around at the bustling scene, she smiled. She loved this time of year, and shopping for gifts was one of her favorite things to do. She had one mission: to find the perfect gift for her sister, Emma. Emma loved unique and thoughtful presents, and Lucy was determined to find something special. The mall seemed like the best place to look, with its endless stores and festive atmosphere. Lucy pulled her list out of her bag and reviewed it. The only item left to buy was Emma's gift. Lucy wandered through the mall, taking in the sights and sounds. She passed a toy store filled with children begging their parents for the latest gadgets and games. She walked by a jewelry shop where couples admired glittering necklaces and rings. After a while, she came across a small boutique that caught her eye. The shop's window display featured elegant scarves, hats, and gloves arranged beautifully under soft, glowing lights. It seemed like the perfect place to find something for Emma. Inside the boutique, Lucy browsed through the racks of scarves. She ran her fingers over the soft fabrics, admiring the different colors and patterns. One scarf, in particular, stood out to her. It was a deep red color with intricate embroidery along the edges. It felt warm and luxurious in her hands. Lucy smiled, imagining how much Emma would love it. After trying it on and looking at herself in the mirror, Lucy decided it was the perfect gift. She took the scarf to the counter and paid for it. The shop assistant wrapped it neatly in a decorative bag, adding a festive ribbon for a finishing touch. Lucy thanked her and left the boutique, feeling pleased with her purchase. As Lucy walked through the mall, she decided to grab a coffee from the food court before heading home. The warm aroma of coffee and pastries filled the air, and Lucy's mouth watered at the thought of a hot drink. She navigated through the crowd, weaving past shoppers and their overflowing bags. That's when she noticed something strange. A man in a gray hoodie seemed to be walking behind her. At first, Lucy didn't think much of it. The mall was crowded, and people were heading in all directions. But as she continued walking, she realized the man was staying close. He was just a few steps behind her, stopping whenever she stopped. Lucy tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, but a sense of unease began to creep in. To test her theory, Lucy slowed her pace and glanced at the reflections in the glass storefronts. The man was still there. He had his hood up, so she couldn't see his face clearly. He didn't appear to be carrying any shopping bags, which struck Lucy as odd. Most people at the mall were either browsing or carrying items they had purchased, but this man seemed to be doing neither. Feeling her heartbeat quicken, Lucy decided to change her path. Instead of heading straight to the food court, she turned into another store. It was a large department store with several entrances and exits. Lucy wandered through the aisles, pretending to browse, while keeping an eye on the entrance. Her plan was simple. If the man passed by, she would know he wasn't following her. But he didn't pass by. Instead, he stopped at the entrance and pretended to look at a display near the door. Lucy's unease turned into fear. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but her gut told her something wasn't right. Deciding it was better to be safe than sorry, she left the store and headed toward the mall's security office. She tried to blend into the crowd, hoping to lose the man in the sea of shoppers. But every time she glanced over her shoulder, he was there, keeping the same distance. Lucy's heart pounded as she quickened her pace. When she finally reached the security office, she burst through the door and explained the situation to the guard on duty. The guard, a middle-aged man with a kind face, listened carefully and reassured her that she was safe. He asked Lucy to describe the man, and she did her best to recall his appearance. The guard promised to review the surveillance footage and see if they could locate him. Lucy sat down in the office, trying to calm her nerves. She sipped a cup of water that the guard had offered her and took deep breaths. After a few minutes, the guard returned with a puzzled expression. "Miss, we reviewed the footage from the cameras," he said slowly, "but there's no one following you." Lucy blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I saw him. He was right behind me." The guard nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but the cameras only show you walking through the mall alone. There's no sign of a man in a gray hoodie." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. How could that be? She was certain she had seen him. The memory of his presence was so vivid. Was it possible the cameras had missed something? Or was there another explanation? Shaken, Lucy decided to leave the mall immediately. The guard offered to escort her to her car, but Lucy declined. She didn't want to make a bigger deal out of the situation than it already was. She thanked the guard and walked quickly toward the parking lot. The cold night air hit her as she stepped outside, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing. As Lucy walked to her car, the feeling of being watched returned. She heard footsteps behind her. Her heart jumped, and she turned around quickly. No one was there. The parking lot was nearly empty, with only a few cars scattered here and there. The shadows seemed to stretch endlessly under the dim streetlights, creating an eerie atmosphere. Lucy's hands shook as she fumbled for her keys. She unlocked her car, got in, and locked the doors as fast as she could. She sat there for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her eyes darted around the parking lot, searching for any sign of movement. But it was silent, except for the faint hum of the wind. She started the car and drove home, her mind replaying the events of the evening over and over. Who was the man in the gray hoodie? Why had the cameras not shown him? And why did she still feel like she wasn't alone? When Lucy finally reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and double-checked the windows. She felt a little safer being home, but the unease lingered. That night, she had trouble sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's figure in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, Lucy tried to put the incident behind her. She told herself it must have been her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe the stress of holiday shopping had made her paranoid. But deep down, she wasn't convinced. There were too many unanswered questions. Lucy avoided the mall after that night. She didn't want to take any chances. Whenever she needed to go shopping, she chose smaller stores or shopped online. But even as she tried to move on, she couldn't forget the feeling of being followed. Sometimes, when she walked down the street or entered a store, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the gray hoodie. Months passed, and the memory of that night slowly began to fade. Lucy went back to her routine, focusing on work and spending time with her friends and family. But every now and then, she'd feel that same eerie sensation, like someone was watching her. She couldn't explain it, but it always sent a shiver down her spine. To this day, Lucy wonders what really happened that evening. Was the man real, or was it all in her head? And if he was real, why did the cameras not see him? She may never know the answers, but one thing is certain. That night at the mall changed the way she sees the world. Lucy learned to trust her instincts, even when they didn't make sense. Because sometimes, the things we can't explain are the ones we should fear the most. The Closed Wing. An extended story. It was a typical Friday evening when four teenagers, Emma, Jack, Mia, and Ben, gathered at the mall. They were close friends who spent most of their weekends together. The mall was their usual hangout spot, but that evening felt different. The place was busier than usual, yet nothing seemed to catch their interest. They roamed from shop to shop, but everything felt dull and repetitive. "I'm bored," Ben said, leaning against a wall near the food court. "We've done this 100 times already. Let's do something exciting for once." Emma sighed, fiddling with her phone. "Like what?" "It's not like there's much to do around here." That's when Ben's face lit up. "I have an idea," he said, lowering his voice as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Let's check out the closed wing." Mia raised an eyebrow. "The closed wing? You mean the part of the mall that's been shut down for years?" "Yeah," Ben replied. "I've heard all sorts of stories about it. People say it's haunted." Jack rolled his eyes. "Haunted? Seriously? That's just something people say to make it sound creepy. There's probably nothing there but old junk." "Exactly," Ben said with a grin. "So why not check it out?" "Come on, don't tell me you're scared." The group hesitated. They'd all heard the rumors about the closed wing. Years ago, a fire had destroyed several stores in that section of the mall, and it had never reopened. Some said strange things had happened there since: mysterious noises, unexplained shadows, and even sightings of figures moving in the darkness. But despite their doubts, curiosity got the better of them. "All right," Emma finally said, though her voice wavered. "But if anything feels off, we're leaving." "Agreed." Everyone nodded, and with that, they set off on their adventure. Entering the closed wing, the group made their way to the far end of the mall, where the entrance to the closed wing was blocked off by barricades and warning signs. The area was dimly lit, and most of the nearby shops were empty, their shutters pulled down. It was clear that not many people came to this part of the mall anymore. "How are we supposed to get in?" Mia asked, glancing at the barricades. Ben smirked and pointed to a small gap where one of the barriers didn't quite meet the wall. "Through there," he said. "Come on, it's easy." One by one, they squeezed through the gap, their hearts racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. On the other side, the air felt colder, and the faint smell of smoke lingered, as if the fire had only just happened. The lights were out, so they turned on their flashlights, the beams cutting through the thick darkness. "Creepy," Emma muttered, hugging herself. The hallway stretched out before them, its walls stained with soot and graffiti. The tiles underfoot were cracked, and bits of debris were scattered everywhere. As they walked, their footsteps echoed eerily, making it sound like someone was following them. "Do you think anyone else has been here?" Jack asked, his voice low. "Probably not in years," Ben replied. "This place has been sealed off since the fire." But as they ventured deeper, they began to notice strange things. The air seemed to grow colder with each step. The faint smell of smoke became stronger, almost suffocating. And then there were the whispers, soft, distant murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, stopping in her tracks. "Hear what?" Jack said, shining his flashlight around. "Whispers," she said, "like someone's talking." The group fell silent, straining to hear. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Then faintly, they heard it too, a soft, almost musical whisper. But as soon as they tried to focus on it, it stopped. "Okay, that's freaky," Emma said. "Can we just look around and leave? This place is giving me the creeps." Strange discoveries, the group pressed on, their flashlights illuminating old, abandoned stores. Most of them were empty, their shelves and displays long gone. But in one store, they found something that made their skin crawl. Mannequins were arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the room, their blank faces turned toward the center. Who would do this? Mia whispered, stepping closer. I don't know, but I don't like it, Emma said, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. It's probably just a prank, Jack said, though his voice didn't sound very confident. Ben, on the other hand, seemed fascinated. This is awesome, he said, snapping a picture with his phone. No one's going to believe this. Reluctantly, they left the store and continued exploring. As they went deeper into the closed wing, the whispers grew louder, though they still couldn't make out any words. The temperature dropped even more, and their breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Finally, they reached the food court. Unlike the rest of the wing, it looked almost untouched by the fire. The tables and chairs were still there, though covered in dust and cobwebs. But what caught their attention was the table in the center. On it stood a single candle, its flame flickering in the darkness. Who lit that? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. They stared at the candle, frozen in place. The flame seemed almost unnatural, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Then, without warning, the candle went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. The escape panic set in. The group huddled together, their flashlights darting around the room. What just happened? Mia whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Ben said, but we need to get out of here. Now. Before they could move, they heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the food court. But they weren't their own. Something else was there with them. Run, Jack shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. The group bolted, sprinting back the way they came. The footsteps followed, growing louder and faster. Something brushed past Emma, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. They didn't stop until they reached the barricades. Scrambling through the gap, they collapsed on the other side, gasping for breath. Just as they thought they were safe, a cold, raspy voice whispered from the darkness, "Don't come back." Shaking with fear, they ran out of the mall and didn't stop until they were far away. None of them spoke on the way home, each lost in their thoughts about what had happened. The aftermath, the group never returned to the closed wing, and they avoided talking about that night. But the experience stayed with them, haunting their dreams and making them question what they had encountered. Sometimes, Emma would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced she could hear the whispers again. Jack would check his windows and doors twice before going to bed, afraid that whatever was in the closed wing might have followed them. Years later, the closed wing remained sealed, its mysteries untouched. But the friends knew one thing for sure. They would never forget the night they dared to enter the dark heart of the mall. A full-length story. Mark was a janitor at a large shopping mall, and he took pride in keeping the place spotless. The mall was a lively hub during the day, filled with people shopping, eating, and laughing. But at night, when Mark started his shift, it was a completely different world. The lights dimmed, the halls echoed, and silence blanketed the space. Mark liked the peace and quiet it gave him time to think. He had worked the night shift for years and was used to the solitude. But one night, something happened that shook him to his core and changed the way he viewed the world. It was a chilly autumn night when Mark arrived at the mall for his usual shift. He parked his car in the empty lot, his footsteps echoing as he walked toward the employee entrance. The air felt colder than usual, and he zipped up his jacket tightly. Inside, he picked up his cleaning cart and began his routine. His first stop was the food court on the first floor. As he wiped down tables and swept the floors, he thought about his life. He had always enjoyed simple things: a warm meal, a good book, and his quiet nights at work. But that night, something felt different, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. After finishing the food court, Mark moved to the second floor. This level housed clothing stores, jewelry shops, and a toy store. He methodically cleaned the floors and windows, humming a soft tune to himself. By the time he reached the third floor, which was less busy during the day and mostly offices and storage, it was nearing midnight. He liked the third floor because it was the quietest. However, that night, it felt unusually still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Mark was mopping near the escalators when he heard a sound that made him pause. It was the ding of an elevator. At first, he thought he had imagined it. The elevators were supposed to be locked at night to prevent unauthorized access. Curious, he set down his mop and walked toward the sound. The elevator doors had just opened when he arrived. He peered inside, but it was empty. His eyes immediately went to the control panel, where he noticed the button for the basement was lit. The basement was an area Mark avoided whenever possible. It was a storage space filled with old equipment, unused furniture, and broken fixtures. The air down there always felt damp, and the fluorescent lights flickered constantly. There were stories among the staff about strange noises and shadows in the basement, but Mark never paid much attention to them. Still, the idea of the elevator going to the basement on its own unsettled him. He hesitated, debating whether he should step inside. Finally, his curiosity got the better of him, and he entered the elevator. The ride down was slow and eerie. The lights flickered, and the hum of the elevator motor sounded louder than usual. Mark's heart began to race. He told himself it was just a malfunction, nothing more. When the doors opened, he found himself in the basement. It was as dark and unwelcoming as he remembered. Only one light was on, far down the hallway. He debated staying in the elevator and going back up, but something compelled him to step out. He grabbed his flashlight from his cart and carefully walked toward the light. The basement smelled musty, and the air felt heavy. Each step echoed loudly, making him more aware of how alone he was. As he moved closer to the light, he heard something that made him freeze in his tracks: laughter. It was faint, like it was coming from far away. His first thought was that someone had broken in. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no response. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and continued walking. The light led him to an old television set sitting on a dusty table. The TV was on, displaying nothing but static. Mark frowned. He didn't remember seeing a TV in the basement before. Who had turned it on? As he stood there, staring at the screen, it suddenly switched off. The room plunged into darkness, except for the beam of his flashlight. Before he could react, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Mark spun around, swinging his flashlight like a weapon, but there was no one there. His breath came in short gasps, and his hands were shaking. He backed away from the spot, his eyes darting around the dark basement. Then he heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from the direction he had just been. Panic set in, and he bolted back toward the elevator. The elevator doors were still open, and he jumped inside, frantically pressing the button for the third floor. Just as the doors began to close, he saw a shadow moving toward him from the darkness. The doors shut, and the elevator began its ascent. Mark's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. When he finally reached the third floor, he ran out of the elevator and didn't stop until he was back in the well-lit food court. He immediately reported the incident to the mall's security team. They listened to his story with skeptical expressions, but agreed to check the basement in the morning. Mark spent the rest of his shift in the security office, too shaken to continue working. The next day, the security team combed through the basement but found nothing unusual. The TV was gone, and there were no signs of anyone else having been there. Mark knew what he had experienced was real, but he couldn't explain it. A week later, he quit his job. He never returned to the mall and tried to forget what had happened, but the memory lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. Years later, Mark still wondered about that night. Had it been a prank? A figment of his imagination? or something else entirely? He never found the answers he was looking for, but one thing was certain: he would never forget the phantom elevator and the chilling events that followed. The moving mannequin Sophie was an ordinary young woman who worked at a clothing store in the mall. She didn't mind the job. It paid the bills, and she liked helping customers find outfits. Most of her shifts were during the day, but sometimes she stayed late to close the store. These late nights often felt a little eerie because the mall became so quiet after all the shoppers and most workers left. Still, Sophie brushed off any uneasy feelings and focused on her work. One particular night, Sophie had stayed late to finish cleaning and preparing the store for the next day. The store's mannequins needed to be rearranged, as the display team had requested a new setup near the entrance. Sophie had been tasked with organizing them. The mannequins were life-size, dressed in trendy outfits, and made to look very realistic. Moving them around was a bit of a hassle because they were heavy and stiff, but Sophie was used to it by now. As she adjusted the mannequins one by one, she stepped back to admire her work. Everything looked perfect. The mannequins were neatly arranged, each showcasing a different style. Satisfied, she turned to organize the shelves behind her. But when she glanced back at the display a few minutes later, her stomach dropped. One of the mannequins was not where she had left it. It had moved a few feet to the side. Sophie frowned, confused. Had she accidentally bumped it earlier? Maybe it had shifted while she was moving the others. She didn't remember doing that, but it was the only explanation that made sense. She pushed the mannequin back into place and told herself not to overthink it. After all, she was tired, and her mind could be playing tricks on her. But as Sophie continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The store felt too quiet, almost unnaturally so. She glanced around but saw nothing unusual. Eventually, she finished her tasks and locked up the store for the night, trying to forget about the strange incident. The next evening, Sophie found herself working late again. She didn't usually mind closing, but after the previous night, she felt a little on edge. Still, she reminded herself that there was nothing to worry about. The mannequin moving had probably just been a coincidence. As she walked past the display that night, something caught her eye. One of the mannequins, the same one that had been out of place the night before, now had a crack on its face. It was a thin, jagged line running across the cheek. Sophie paused, staring at it. She was sure the mannequin hadn't been damaged yesterday. How had it gotten cracked? None of her co-workers had mentioned anything about it. Sophie's unease grew, but she tried to brush it off. Maybe someone had accidentally bumped the mannequin earlier in the day. She decided not to dwell on it and focused on her closing tasks. As the hours went by, the mall grew quieter and quieter. By the time Sophie was finishing up, she was the only person left in the store. She was locking the doors when she heard it, a faint tapping sound. It was so soft that at first, she thought she had imagined it. But then she heard it again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. Sophie turned slowly, her heart pounding. Her eyes widened in horror. The cracked mannequin was standing right against the glass door. Its hand was pressed flat against the glass, and its fingers were moving, scratching lightly. Sophie froze, unable to look away. The mannequin's lifeless eyes seemed to be staring straight at her. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. Mannequins didn't move. They couldn't move. Summoning all her courage, Sophie ran to the mall's security office. She burst through the door, breathless and trembling, and told the guards what had happened. At first, they looked at her with skepticism. A moving mannequin? It sounded ridiculous. But Sophie's fear was so genuine that they agreed to check the store with her. When they arrived, everything looked normal. The mannequins were all in their usual spots, motionless and harmless. The guards gave Sophie a reassuring pat on the shoulder and told her she was probably just tired. But Sophie knew what she had seen. She knew the mannequin had moved. The next day, Sophie couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She tried to tell herself that maybe she really had imagined it. Maybe she was just overworked, and her mind had played tricks on her. But deep down, she didn't believe that. She decided to quit her job. Whatever was going on in that store, she didn't want to stick around to find out. After quitting, Sophie refused to go back to the mall. She avoided it entirely, even when her friends invited her to shop there. She never told them the full story, worried they might think she was crazy. But she couldn't forget the mannequin, the way its fingers had moved, the crack on its face, the lifeless eyes that seemed to watch her. Over time, Sophie found a new job at a different store in a different part of town. She tried to move on, but every now and then, she would have nightmares about that night. In her dreams, the mannequin would follow her, its cracked face getting closer and closer until she woke up in a cold sweat. Even years later, Sophie couldn't fully explain what had happened. She didn't know if it was her imagination, a prank, or something else entirely. But one thing was certain. She would never forget the mannequin that moved. The locked bathroom. One quiet evening, Clara and her best friend Rachel decided to spend some time shopping at the mall. They had been planning this trip for weeks, excited to explore the latest fashions, try on shoes, and maybe grab a snack at their favorite cafe. The mall was alive with its usual bustle, families with kids, couples on dates, and groups of teenagers laughing and taking selfies. Clara and Rachel were in high spirits, moving from store to store and enjoying each other's company. After hours of browsing through racks of clothes and admiring window displays, Rachel suddenly said, "I need to use the restroom." Clara nodded, holding their shopping bags. "Sure, let's find one." They made their way to the food court, where Clara remembered seeing a sign for public restrooms. The food court was busy, filled with people eating burgers, pizza, and ice cream. The smell of fried food and coffee filled the air. Near the corner of the food court, they spotted the restroom entrance. Rachel smiled at Clara. "I'll be right back. Can you wait here?" Clara agreed and leaned against a wall, scrolling through her phone to pass the time. Minutes ticked by. Clara checked her phone again. It had been longer than she expected. She glanced at the restroom door, wondering what was taking Rachel so long. She thought maybe there was a long line inside or Rachel had gotten distracted. Clara decided to call her name, stepping closer to the door. "Rachel," she called softly. No answer. A few more minutes passed, and now Clara started to feel uneasy. Something didn't feel right. She pushed open the restroom door and stepped inside. The restroom was eerily quiet. There were a few stalls, all empty, and the sinks gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Clara's voice trembled as she called out again, "Rachel." Her words echoed in the empty room. Rachel was nowhere to be found. Clara's heart raced. She stepped back outside, scanning the food court. There was no sign of Rachel. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Rachel had left through another exit and was waiting somewhere else. She checked her phone again, hoping for a message or call, but there was nothing. Panic started to set in. Unable to shake her growing fear, Clara decided to contact mall security. She approached the nearest information desk and explained the situation. The security officer on duty, a middle-aged man with a kind face, listened carefully. "Don't worry," he assured her. "We'll help you find your friend." The security team quickly got to work. They checked the restroom, just as Clara had, but found no trace of Rachel. Then they reviewed the mall's security camera footage. Clara watched anxiously as the footage showed Rachel entering the restroom. But then, something strange happened. Rachel never came out. Clara's stomach dropped. It didn't make any sense. Where could Rachel have gone? The security team searched the surrounding areas, including nearby stores and hallways. They even checked the emergency exits, but Rachel was nowhere to be found. Clara felt helpless. She kept replaying the moments before Rachel disappeared, trying to think of anything that might explain what happened. But there was nothing unusual. It had been an ordinary evening until now. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel was still missing. Clara couldn't stop thinking about her friend. She put up posters around the mall and nearby neighborhoods, hoping someone had seen Rachel or knew something. She also talked to the police, who launched their own investigation. But no matter how hard everyone searched, there were no leads. It was as if Rachel had vanished into thin air. Clara began to feel the weight of guilt and sadness. She blamed herself for letting Rachel go into the restroom alone. What if she had insisted on going with her? Would things have turned out differently? These thoughts haunted her day and night. She couldn't focus on anything else. Her family and other friends tried to comfort her, but nothing seemed to help. The mystery of Rachel's disappearance consumed her. Months passed, and the world moved on, but Clara couldn't. She started digging deeper, trying to find out more about the restroom where Rachel had disappeared. She spent hours online, reading forums and articles about similar incidents. To her surprise, she discovered stories from other people who had experienced strange things at the same mall. Some mentioned hearing odd noises near the restroom, while others claimed to feel a chilling sensation when they walked past it. One day, Clara stumbled upon a local urban legend about the mall. According to the stories, there was a hidden hallway behind the restrooms, built decades ago when the mall was first constructed. Some said it led to a storage area that had been abandoned for years. Others believed it was connected to something more sinister, like illegal activities or even supernatural occurrences. Clara wasn't sure what to believe, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that the hidden hallway might be linked to Rachel's disappearance. Fueled by determination, Clara decided to investigate the rumors herself. She returned to the mall, this time with a small flashlight and a notebook. Her hands trembled as she approached the restroom. Memories of that night flooded her mind, but she pushed them aside. She needed to find answers. Clara carefully examined the restroom walls, looking for anything unusual. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, she noticed a faint outline of a door on one of the walls, partially hidden behind a large mirror. Her heart pounded as she reached out to touch it. The surface felt different, almost hollow. Could this be the entrance to the hidden hallway? Before Clara could investigate further, a voice startled her. "Can I help you?" It was a janitor, holding a mop and a bucket. Clara hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Oh, I thought I dropped something," she replied nervously. The janitor gave her a curious look, but didn't press further. Clara decided to leave for the moment, but she made a mental note to return later when the restroom was empty. Over the next few weeks, Clara visited the mall several times, trying to find the right moment to explore the hidden door. Each time, she felt a mix of fear and determination. What if she found something that could explain Rachel's disappearance? Or worse, what if she uncovered something dangerous? One night, when the mall was about to close and the restroom was empty, Clara finally mustered the courage to push the mirror aside. To her shock, it moved, revealing a narrow, dark hallway. The air was cold and carried a faint, musty smell. Clara's hands shook as she turned on her flashlight and stepped inside. The hallway was long and empty, with bare concrete walls. Clara's footsteps echoed as she walked, each step filling her with a sense of unease. She noticed old, rusted pipes running along the ceiling and strange markings on the walls. Some looked like scratches, while others appeared to be symbols she couldn't understand. The further she went, the more uneasy she felt. At the end of the hallway, Clara found a heavy metal door. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light seeped through the crack. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. Inside, she found a small room filled with old furniture, stacks of boxes, and random objects covered in dust. It looked like the storage area from the rumors. But as Clara scanned the room, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small bracelet lying on the floor. It was Rachel's. Clara recognized it immediately because she had given it to Rachel as a birthday gift. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she picked up the bracelet. This was proof that Rachel had been here. But where was she now? Clara searched the room for more clues, but found nothing else. The room felt oppressive, as if it held secrets that refused to be uncovered. Suddenly, Clara heard a noise behind her. She turned quickly, shining her flashlight down the hallway, but it was empty. Her heart raced as she felt the urge to run. Gripping the bracelet tightly, she hurried out of the room and back through the hallway. She replaced the mirror and left the restroom, her mind racing with questions. Clara shared her discovery with the police, but they were skeptical. They searched the hidden hallway and the room but found no new evidence. The case remained unsolved, and Rachel's disappearance stayed a mystery. However, Clara's discovery gave her a sense of closure. She knew she had done everything she could to find her friend. Years later, Clara still thinks about Rachel every day. She avoids malls altogether, unable to shake the memories of that fateful night. The hidden hallway remains a topic of local legend, with new rumors and theories emerging over time. Some believe it's haunted, while others think it hides a dark secret. As for Clara, she continues to hope that one day the truth about Rachel's disappearance will come to light. Until then, she holds on to the bracelet as a reminder of her friend and the bond they share. The mystery of the locked bathroom remains unsolved, but Clara's determination to find answers has left a lasting mark on everyone who hears her story.